Chapter 13. Stephanie wanted to scream. One of the acolytes rushed behind her with incredible speed and grabbed her wrists and twisted her around, awkwardly stretching her arms. She winced at the discomfort in her joints as she looked helplessly at Samuel's unconscious body. His face had a calm and natural expression. If it was not for the fact that his eyes were glowing brightly, they might have thought he was sleeping. "It's one of them," said a black-cloaked acolyte. "Maybe two of them," said another of the demon worshippers as they felt around Stephanie's neck and chest for a key. Stephanie struggled away from his touch, but this only made the demon worshippers laugh. "Touchy?" asked the demon worshipper. "Don't worry, I'm just checking for this." The demon worshipper reached into Stephanie's top and pulled the mirrored key up out of her blouse. "What do we do with them?" asked one of the other acolytes. "We don't want Hellfire's group to get them, or the demon prophetess to learn about them. So we move them out of reach," said the one holding Stephanie. "We move them to a place where Felix has the advantage." Felix Light was a name that Stephanie had hoped not to hear again. She remembered fighting alongside Jonathan Knight when Row 82 still believed they were all heretics. In hindsight, things seemed much simpler now. Of course, time travel would complicate just about anything. "We need to know what we have," said the acolyte that had reached into her top and exposed the mirrored key. He turned to her, and although she could not see his eyes through the black cloak, she could feel them on her. She felt miserable, and it reminded her of her treatment at the hands of the slavers in Kappa 16's facility. Having to be inspected and poked and prodded was humiliating, and she lowered her head to try and hide from the gaze of her captors. "What key is this?" demanded the acolyte. They had no way of knowing that she could not respond, even if she wanted to. Her silence angered them. The acolyte struck her hard across the face, and the flavor of blood began to fill her mouth. She ignored the pain and slowly turned back helplessly toward her attacker. "Tell us!" thundered the acolyte. He struck her again. The sharp sting faded into a dull throb as blood trickled down her chin. She looked over at Samuel and determined that she only needed to buy time. She did not know how long he would be in the mind realm, but as she closed her eyes, she could see him in vision as he fought off black-cloaked demon worshippers and was convinced that he would come to her rescue. "Her eyes are starting to glow," shouted another acolyte. Her interrogator hit her again, and everything became blurry. She smiled as consciousness slipped away. One of the acolytes slung Stephanie over his shoulder and motioned to the others to pick Samuel up. Two acolytes pulled him up. The speed demon worshippers rushed through the trees, carefully looking for any signs of anyone else before rushing away with the power of their demon keys. The perspective of Samuel Godwinson in the mind realm was somewhat different. He had finally located Jonathan and tried to explain that Stephanie had interrupted Sarah Hawkins' powers. As he had called out, Samuel suddenly found himself being dragged away from Jonathan. He struggled, but Jonathan did not seem to notice him, and before long he had disappeared from sight. Though everything was naturally a bit darker in the mind realm, it seemed especially dark. When Samuel had first entered the mind realm, he had felt as though he were underwater and unconsciously tried to swim up to a surface that he could not see. It had not taken long to realize that the mind realm simply appeared more blue. He had certainly found dangers in the mind realm. The strong emotions tied to those who were in love or those who were in pain flowed into frightening sounds, and if strong enough, could even take form. Beyond the people, there were other spirits and entities that thrived in the mind realm. Some of them were friendly, such as his white horse Gideon. Others were parasitic and urged people to express their anger or lust so that it became tangible in the mind realm and they could feed on it. Years of experience and exploration in this realm had made Samuel feel comfortable in it, in spite of the dangers. Samuel did not realize that he possessed a natural mental toughness that helped him cope with the strains of the mind realm. He took it for granted. An average person might have been driven mad with the darkness, but he remained calm as he felt himself being dragged across the soft grass. He breathed deeply and drew on his inner strength. Slowly his ki and his eyes began glowing brightly. Although the darkness grew thicker, the light from his eyes and ki created a bubble of light immediately around him. "Stop it!" hissed a voice that echoed from all directions. Of course, the hostile command provoked Samuel. His ki expanded into a large broadsword. "Show yourself," demanded Samuel. "Do not speak to the King of the Hidden in such a tone," hissed the voice. "The bearer of the soul key will speak to you in any tone he wishes," thundered Samuel confidently, "particularly when you drag him away without provocation." "Unacceptable," hissed the King of the Hidden. "You speak about provocation after you have attacked my master without cause." The word master was said in a different tone, almost as though it were not said naturally. Samuel straightened his back and held his sword out defensively. He hoped the light it emanated would push away the clouds of darkness and reveal his captor. Instead, they provoked a blood-curdling shriek and a barrage of blunt force attacks from all around him, as though the clouds had picked up clubs and sticks to strike him from all sides. Spinning and slashing with his blade, he was able to avoid most of the attacks, but several hit him hard in the back and pushed him face down into the ground. He rolled to his feet and spun around. "You are strong," hissed the King of the Hidden, "but we will outlast you." Samuel gripped his sword tighter and prepared to prove him wrong. As Samuel fought his hidden attacker, in another part of the mind realm, Jonathan Knight appeared. The sudden disappearance of the soul key bearer had troubled him, and as soon as Chloe Baldwin had been rescued, he had slipped into the mind realm to see if he could find him. "Samuel?" shouted Jonathan as he searched around. "Samuel Godwinson?" The blue tint of the mind realm made everything run together. The sky was blue, the grass was blue, and the people that could be heard screaming and shouting periodically were also blue. If Victor is so worried about changing time, then how does he know that saving Chloe wouldn't cause the same problem? Muttered a familiar voice in an angry tone. It was his wife, Kirana Knight. Since they had been married, it had been easier for him to pick up on her thoughts. He never tried to read her, unless she wanted to have a private conversation with him, but even without any effort, he had become attuned to the sound of her voice. He had come to realize that all of her anger and harsh words were a facade. She had trained herself never to be weak or expose emotions from living among fire demon worshippers. They exploited emotions without mercy or remorse, even from their own acolytes. Stealing food had been necessary for her survival in the icy fortress in which she had grown up. At first, she was shocked at how the acolytes responsible for protecting the food had been treated by their superiors when they had discovered some had been stolen. Fire demon worshippers branded the flesh of their victims repeatedly until a seal had been burned into their backs that activated a power in their demon keys, causing the blood of the prisoner to literally boil. As much as she hated the fire demon worshippers, the screams of their low-ranking acolytes had given her sleepless nights. It became easy for her to adopt the title of Snow Leopard, as she periodically attacked and killed fire demon worshippers herself, and her quick and lethal movements spared her the pain of listening to their torture. Lizard had been the most surprised that Jonathan and Kirana's marriage had lasted as long as it had. He had frequently told Jonathan that a pretty face was not worth all the abuse he endured. Jonathan recognized her habit to criticize and scold him for what it was. She hated the thought of losing him, and so she wanted to convey her displeasure with any decision that put his safety in jeopardy. he was able to hear the difference in the way she talked to him and the way she talked to Lizard, who she thought was annoying. Of course, he also had the benefit of spending time with her in other situations. She seemed to become a different person entirely when Jonathan cooked meals for her. The distant future did not have the food quality of previous ages, but she seemed to appreciate his effort to season and flavor the bland vegetables and wild squirrel or snake meat, or to fry the crickets that he had caught. Her voice softened, and her eyes lit up. Thinking about his wife brought an involuntary smile to his face, in spite of the urgency he still felt to find Samuel Godwinson. He continued shouting, hoping that he might find some sign of him. Suddenly, a small glowing light on the horizon appeared, and he fell silent. Glowing lights were not necessarily unusual in the mind realm, but they were always some shade of blue. The light he saw was white. Jonathan gripped his key, and his eyes glowed white defensively. As the glowing light took shape, it seemed to bounce. He squinted to try and determine whether the source of the light was friendly. After a few moments, he realized it was the beautiful white horse on which he had first seen Samuel. Jonathan relaxed as the horse galloped toward him. "Samuel," shouted Jonathan, "I was worried about you." "I am not Samuel Godwinson," shouted the rider. Jonathan's eyes widened with surprise. He grew defensive again for a few moments, until he recognized the familiar shape of Victor Lee. "Michael?" asked Jonathan in surprise. "Correct," said Michael as he approached and slowed Gideon down. "Where is Samuel?" asked Jonathan. "He was trying to tell me something." Michael dismounted, and the horse whinnied softly. "That is not the right question," said Michael. Jonathan frowned. "Cryptic as ever," he said. "Shouldn't you be asking where Sam is?" asked Michael. His beloved red-tailed hawk friend had helped him in the spirit realm before. Even though they were 1,000 years in the past, it suddenly occurred to Jonathan that traveling to the past had not affected Sam's ability to join him when he had fought William Fine in the pursuit of Abaddon. "She won't be born for 1,000 years, said Jonathan. "How can she be here? And how did she appear 500 years before she was born, for that matter?" "Time works a little differently in the mind realm," replied Michael, "at least for those that naturally exist here." "What do you mean?" asked Jonathan. "Well, I just spent an hour trying to persuade Joshua Beckman that he should not try to use the mind realm as an escape," said Michael. "Do you know of him?" "Yes," answered Jonathan. "But you're saying that Sam naturally exists here?" "Yes," answered Jonathan. "But you're saying that Sam naturally exists here? She literally lived in the real world." "She did?" asked Michael. Jonathan smiled and shook his head. "Okay, so where is she?" asked Jonathan. There was a loud shriek, and Jonathan looked up. "Right behind me," answered Michael. "Sam!" exclaimed Jonathan. The hawk gently circled down and landed on Jonathan's arm. "I am so happy to see you." Sam shrieked as if to reply in kind. Jonathan laughed. "I wish Kirana could have gotten to know you," Jonathan said as she turned her head toward Michael. "Kirana Sepharvaim?" asked Michael. "Well," said Jonathan with a hint of pride, "it's Kirana Knight now." Sam shrieked as if surprised by the information. Michael's smile faded away. "I am sure that you can tell that you are nearing the end, then," said Michael in a suddenly solemn voice. "You have discovered the tragedy of the betrayer with no intentions. You have discovered the horror of the betrayer with evil intentions. You must quickly solve the mystery of the betrayer with good intentions." "Can you not tell us the mystery?" asked Jonathan. "This horse is named Gideon," said Michael, completely ignoring Jonathan. "He serves Samuel Godwinson. He can take you to the vicinity of where Samuel is locked in combat. Sam can give you insight as to how you can help. Once you see the result there, perhaps you will understand a bit more why the mystery is for you to discover on your own." Michael vanished out of sight, leaving Jonathan standing next to Gideon, with Sam perched on his outstretched arm. Jonathan pressed his lips together and breathed deeply. After a moment, he turned to Sam. "What did any of that mean?" asked Jonathan. Sam shrieked. "Okay, Gideon," said Jonathan as he turned to the horse. He leapt up and straddled the large white beast, carefully keeping Sam as undisturbed as he could. The horse leapt forward, and Jonathan grabbed its hair with his free hand to hold himself on. The mind drum began to swirl all around him, and Jonathan had to resist the urge to vomit as the horse galloped ahead. After a minute, the mind drum stopped swirling, and a massive dark cloud appeared before them. Gideon reared back on his hind legs, and Jonathan fell back and off. Before he hit the ground, Sam leapt into the air and flapped her wings to gain altitude. Jonathan got to his feet and stood next to Gideon. "What is this?" he asked. Gideon whinnied and swung his head back and forth. Jonathan could see the fear and confusion in his eyes. He put a hand gently above Gideon's nose and smiled. It seemed to calm the horse. "Sam," he said, "what can you see from above?" Sam circled down towards one side of the dark cloud. Jonathan smiled. She would do this when she spotted prey when they had lived together in the deserts. He rushed over as Sam directed and grabbed his key. He pulled the chain off of his neck as it glowed and morphed into a single-edged katana. Sam shrieked from above. Jonathan stopped and looked around. The grass in the area was thick but dry. He looked very carefully at it, and suddenly noticed some of the grass sway. As there was no breeze to push it, Jonathan slashed with his weapon and cut the grass short. A long tentacle stretched through the grass as far as he could see, both away and toward the cloud. Jonathan knew what this meant. Some creature was being manipulated by William Fine. Jonathan took only a moment before he sliced the tentacle. It began spurting a foul, dark fluid into the cut grass as it writhed as if in pain. Jonathan turned toward the cloud and noticed it getting slightly thinner. He had cut the puppet from the control of its master. He rushed in with his glowing blade. The light pushed the darkness away as he pressed into the cloud. "Samuel?" he shouted. "Jonathan?" came a tired response. Jonathan laughed and headed toward the sound. Suddenly a long appendage swung down through the darkness toward Jonathan. Sam must have sensed it, because she darted toward it and buried her talons into it. There was a hissing scream as Sam disappeared into the darkness. Enough of the dark cloud followed after Sam that Jonathan was able to make out a writhing form being pulled away. He rushed toward it and swung his sword. Instead of the simple hissing scream, there was a loud shriek. Jonathan had found their enemy. Having identified the main body of the parasitic king, it took only a single slice to stop it. The cloud slowly dispersed, and Samuel watched as the silhouette of a slender man in a long coat, wielding a sword, appeared. "Jonathan," he said. Jonathan smiled. "Are you okay?" asked Jonathan. "I've been better," he said. "I've seen my share of awful things in the mind realm, but this was a bit different." "It was a puppet," said Jonathan, "being controlled by William Fine." Samuel laughed. "He was afraid to come after me himself," said Samuel. "Thanks for helping me out of a tough spot." Gideon whinnied and rushed to Samuel's side. "Hey there," said Samuel with a smile as he got to his feet. Sam shrieked and returned to Jonathan's arm. "I see you have a friend of your own," said Samuel. Jonathan smiled and nodded. "Yes, but perhaps we can save that for whatever urgent news you had for me," said Jonathan. Samuel nodded. "Right," said Samuel. "Stephanie was able to disrupt Sarah Hawkins, so we were hoping that you could use the opportunity to free Chloe Baldwin." "We freed her," said Jonathan, "and it is undoubtedly because of Stephanie's help. We'll head back to the hospital tower and thank her properly." "No," said Samuel urgently. "What?" asked Jonathan in a confused tone. "The tower has fallen," said Samuel. "Stephanie and I only barely escaped with our lives. David Sawyer's siege engines took out the tower, and his fire demon worshippers have Levi Crawford and Ethan McCarthy." "No," whispered Jonathan. "Where are you physically, then?" "Let's go," said Samuel. He turned to Gideon and in an amazing leap jumped onto his back. He turned to Jonathan. "It will be quicker this way," said Samuel. Jonathan's sword returned to its key shape, and he hung it on his neck before leaping up onto the horse. Sam shrieked as the world began to spin and Gideon galloped away. After a few moments, the world returned to normal, and Gideon slowed to a stop. While it was a gradual enough slowdown for Samuel, it was fast enough that Jonathan lost his balance and fell off of Gideon. Sam shrieked and circled above Jonathan as if to express concern. "Are you all right?" asked Samuel. "I will be," stammered Jonathan as he got to his feet and dusted himself off. They surveyed the area. There were forests and a lake in the hills. Jonathan tilted his head. "What is it?" asked Samuel. "If this place were completely frozen over, it would be familiar," he said. "Frozen over?" asked Samuel. "I don't know about that, but I do know that the building over that ridge is a part of a shrine that Molly Patterson commissioned." "The shrine where Erica Kingsley put the key of origins," said Jonathan in recognition. Suddenly a huge streak of smoke appeared in the sky, and a small capsule attached to a parachute fell down, splashing into the lake. "What was that?" asked Samuel. Swarms of black-robed men darted with incredible speed toward the lake. "I don't know," said Jonathan, "but Felix Light's men are all over it." Of course, they did not immediately know that it was a rocket that had been launched by Lucas and Row 82, and before they could reach it to investigate, they saw Stephanie lying on the ground, bruised and bleeding from being beaten. Samuel clenched his fists, and Jonathan gasped. "We'll be here as soon as we can," promised Jonathan.